was really intense music.
That was very intense intro. I liked it.
That's
Got
it.
pumped
That's our
up.
new intro. I think we'll take the first part of the song and go straight into the second part of the song. But so that's our new pre-roll. Welcome back to another episode of the MSP Cyber Roundtable. I've got with me Ryan Spelman from K Logix Security. Um, Ryan, we didn't talk about it yet, but like the talk of the week here, I'm up near Albany, and like we're in like the deepest part of frigid Arctic hellscape winter. You were in Albany. Where are you
Yep.
now?
So I am one of those COVID refugees from the north to the south. So I'm in Orlando area. That's where I
Oh my
am.
god.
K Logix, ironically, is in Boston. So I've been spending most of my time on Teams chats when I can, sending my coworkers listings for the Orlando area. I'm like, hey, still letting people in. I know that snows pretty bad. There's a nice 3-bedroom around the corner. That's not too far. So,
it's been it's been at least 5 years since we had to deal with something like this, but it was intense.
yeah.
Uh, I walked to the office this morning. Not only do we get the 2 feet of snow, but I walked to the office this morning. I am fully like enveloped, like an Arctic warrior, full face mask and everything, and I'm still like there's ice inside the mask when I when I get to the office because
Oh,
it's -4 with wind.
oh, I know. And honestly, it's so funny. Like I was in Albany for nearly 18 years. It's where I went to college, where my wife is, where we raised our kids, and had a 100-foot long driveway for banana reasons. So I'm used to dealing with it. And it just when COVID hit, one of those things where like we most of our families moving down here, we're like, let's just call it. Let's just take that move and do here. And I don't miss it one bit in terms of the snow. I'll say this though. My kids love it. They love when we go back up north to family in like Western New York and area. They love seeing the snow, and I'm always like, oh, I'm good. I'm good. It's
Well,
trauma.
I'm jealous of you this week. Um, all right, so we're here to talk about tabletops today. Before we get into that, Ryan, I actually don't know that we've had you on this show before. Have you been
So
on before? No.
I don't think
Okay.
so. No.
All right. Well, let's do the intro to Ryan. So, before you were K Logix, I know at some point you were at CIS, and then before
Yep.
that, you were at one point in your life not in cyber. I'm curious, like, how did you get in your chair?
Yeah. So it's been a little bit of an interesting journey at points. So I started, as I mentioned, I was living in Albany, and I started working for the New York State Office of Homeland Security. I was actually working on the Weapons of Mass Destruction Task Force, which when you're 22 sounds pretty awesome, but really I was doing a lot of grants management and disaster preparedness work and that kind of like. So it was good. I ended up going all over in the Homeland Security apparatus in the state, and eventually ended up in an appointed position. Which, as a politically appointed person, as the winds shift, your job can sometimes shift with it. And at that time, actually, my job shifted, and I happened to be friendly with Will Pelgrin, who's the head of CIS at the time, great guy. And I said, hey, Will, I'm actually going to be on the market soon. You know a lot of people. Is there anybody who might be looking to hire? And he said, actually, I'd love to hire you. We actually have a role here for you here at CIS under this new MSI sec that we're building out here, the Multi-State Information Sharing Analysis Center. And I said, I don't know much about cyber. He's like, well, we can teach you. Don't worry. So I came aboard. I focused initially on the more of the intergovernmental aspects of it, working with cities and states to coordinate response and contracts and policy, and working with governors' offices. And over time, I started kind of just finding I really did like the cybersecurity half of the house, because I had been, I'd done homeland security and tabletops and homeland security and the physical security aspects. I'd done that work, and now the cyber side was just sort of the same stuff, just different types of attackers, different types of attacks, and different layers of security. And so I quickly learned as much as I could, got a bunch of certifications, and then I found myself actually running a sort of a private consulting practice within CIS. So we were helping clients and working with them. And so eventually I was there for 8 years, and I kind of did everything you could do there. And I got an offer to go to Kroll, which is a firm down in New York City and worldwide. And they were looking to stand up a third-party risk product. They needed someone to help with that. So I jumped on board there and eventually worked my way up to supporting the managing director for North America for proactive consulting, which was an awesome thing. You're traveling the world. You've got, doing calls with Sweden one day and Hong Kong the next, and what have you. But I also knew it was not long term what I wanted to do. I really wanted to get a little closer to the customer because it was very transactional. Like Kroll is a massive company. They deal with massive clients, some of the biggest names in the world, and you just kind of go in and out, right? You solve the problem, instant response, or you do the assessment or the pen testing, you kind of move on. And I kind of wanted to build relationships with people. So when K Logix came calling, it's a VAR that wanted to build a cybersecurity consulting arm. We already did a pen testing arm. And they said, "Hey, we'd love to have you head this up." I was like, "Well, this sounds great," and it has been great, right? I've had a chance to build relationships with customers, work with them over years, see them on their journey, and that's been the most rewarding part. And that goes back to sort of why I got into the security space to begin with, right? I want to help people feel safe, I want to help people feel secure, and I kind of now feel that way at K Logix that I did when I was in Homeland Security, where like I was helping cities and the state be protected against terrorism. Well, now I'm helping companies truly be safer against cyber attacks, and that's a similar rewarding feeling.
Well, that's actually a really interesting story because most of the people that I talk to in cyber advisory start out as non-cyber engineers, and
Mm-hmm.
that's an interesting point of view, vantage point, and I'm sure you bring a totally different lens to the problem space than I do, for example.
Well, it's funny you say that, right? Like, so I had to learn a lot. Like, I didn't know like
Oh
JavaScript
yeah,
engineer. Yeah, like all this stuff. I had to teach myself that at 30. When I was trying to transition over, I was like, okay, let me. And that's actually as a shout out to like the SANS Institute getting their certifications. I've got like 3 of those GX, and just CIS for letting me kind of shoulder look a lot of people. But yeah, I actually did have to kind of build my knowledge up. The 7 layers and different how does a TCP handshake work? All the different aspects. I had to you know teach myself that or learn that and get to that point. But then conversely to your point, like I also understand policy and governance and tabletops and executive communication in a way that someone who's been building networks for 20 years may not have had that exposure to. And in fact,
right.
like on my team, I have people who have that background who are great, and then I've got some people who are more policy oriented, and they both. I try to put a lot of times I try to put those same people on the same project so they complement each other. So one person saying you're missing a hole in the configuration here, another person saying, well, that's a business critical thing that the leadership needs to understand. So we need to communicate that back, and it's a nice synergy.
Yeah, I about 10 years ago made a transition out of the technical space into the advisory and cyber management space, and I had to learn all of those things that probably came really naturally to you. Um,
It's but yet you can probably just like, and I know you can, right? You can build a GUI for a database far faster than I could, right? I'm like struggling through trying to
well,
make sure
I don't know
my
if
code
that's
works
true
when I commit.
anymore. I don't know
Sure.
if that's true anymore. People aren't even coding anymore. Apparently, that's gone out of
Live
style.
coding. Yeah.
I I think we're gonna see a transition this year away from that word vibe because there's the implication there is that you're communicating with words or with intent because you don't know how to engineer things.
Hmm.
But the reality is the most sophisticated engineering organizations in the planet have given up line coding the same way they've given up writing assembly. And
Yeah.
you still need a software engineer that understands how software is built to do it, but he's managing agents, right? Managing
Hmm.
agents that are doing the work, and then you're in that management oversight position. And so I don't know that I could build that faster than you could. I think we'd probably be around the same
No, you
speed.
would. You would. But your point there is so true, right? Like, some of the talk to like, well, I don't want to do computer science, where I want to do cybersecurity because there's no job for computer science engineers. And I'm like, well, time out here, time out here. There may be less jobs or there may be different jobs, but
They're different.
there's always going to be a need for someone who can help figure out like the interfaces and how these databases connect. And I said, if that's your natural thing, there is a path in cybersecurity there for you too, especially because that's important to understand how everything fits together, because that's how you can figure out how things can unfit together if there's a problem. But there's definitely a need for like strong programmers who can take a vision from someone in product marketing and say, okay, go here. The only thing is they can do that now without having to type down, like break their wrist in the process. They can have those, like I said, those agents do a lot of it. Then they can say, oh, no, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Let's fix this, change this. That doesn't work. And now they're coming back quicker than they ever did before.
Yeah, and it just, from a macro perspective, clearly the people that are in customer service got hit first, right,
Yeah.
by this AI disruption.
Yep.
But the IT industry has been an early adopter here, occupational hazard.
Hmm.
We're gonna come out the other side and we're gonna be through the disruption, and then we're gonna help the rest of the world the same way we help them all digitize, right? Move into different patterns of work, right? And that's
Yeah. To your point with customer service, though, it's funny. Like I had to change something with an airline, and they said, "Oh, we'll text you instead." I was like, "Oh, fine, that works." So I had this text conversation going with the customer service agent, and I'm going back and forth, and it was somewhat of a, it wasn't complicated, but it was like a little bit of a tricky request, like using some points a certain way. And they're like, okay, and it was after 10 minutes. Like, I'm really sorry it's taking so long. I'm like, no, it's fine, because they told me their name was like Chris or something. I'm like, it's okay, Chris, it's fine, take your time. I'm not rush. And apologize again. And then after he did something, and then after that, he goes, I'm really sorry, I have to get the human involved. And I was like, wait, you're not the human? I thought you were the human. Chris, I thought we had a thing going here. And then like the human texted me real quick, like, oh yeah, I fixed it for you. And that's the thing, is that like I think as everything is, right, it's that it's AI can do a lot and it's getting better, but it's still, some things that are especially like complex situations or multi-situational things. That's actually one of the challenges of cybersecurity, right? Like cybersecurity is never one thing. That's why AI will come to cybersecurity, already is coming to cybersecurity, but the need for people to figure out 6 different systems at the same time, which is what AI is not well suited to do, is proof in other things, right? Customer service, if you have a simple question like, what are your hours? The agent's gonna go, I can tell you that, no problem. I can tell you that in the address too. And you say, what are your hours on the 4th February if it's going to rain and you're an outdoor location? It'll go, not sure. It just can't comprehend different sources of data like that.
Well, and I think a lot of people are afraid that this and the future has yet to be written, but they're afraid that the AI that's being developed out there is really smart because it's good at pretending to be smart, confidently intelligent,
Mm-hmm.
even when it's completely making stuff
Wrong.
up. Yeah, very confidently wrong.
Yes.
Like a 19-year-old.
Yep.
Um,
Good
so
analogy.
but the reality is it's not a big smart brain that's going to come replace intelligence anytime soon. What it is going to end up doing to information technology is be a lens that moderates every human interaction with the digital space is going to be through
Mm-hmm.
that layer. And I think as the greater market gets to see their own jobs impacted, and oh, by the way, they still have a job at the end of the day.
Yep.
You know, they'll calm down a little bit. So we're I'm gonna bring things back around to tabletopping here.
Tabletops. Yeah.
Let's come back around in case anyone wants to ask a quick question. But so what we're talking about today is cybersecurity tabletops. There's different types. We'll get into that in a few minutes. But it's worth pointing out that there's a lot of organizations that need these, not only because it's the cheapest way actually to simulate how an organization is going to deal with a difficult situation
Mm-hmm.
or a new process. It's actually a very, very low cost from the perspective of full simulation. Um,
Yes.
but also, just about every cybersecurity standard prioritizes this as like, oh, by the way, you also need to do a tabletop before you get to complete your cybersecurity program and say that it's complete.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make sure that you've put all your theory to at least the theoretical test, right? That you've done your walkthroughs. So
Well, it's like fire drills, right? The reason why every organization has to do a fire drill, right? Every building has to do fire drills, schools who do fire drills and stuff, is because unless you discover, oh, those doors are locked, we can't go out that way unless someone is there to unlock the doors, right? And that's something you want to find out when it's 70 degrees outside and it's sunny. You don't want to figure that out when there's a fire in the building and everybody's running around, right? And that's the whole idea, is that like it's a much more cost effective, to your point, low risk way of finding out if things are actually done correctly and properly. And would you be able to handle this as a sport? Which is why like I said, every framework, encourages tabletops, because it's the best way to say, are you actually ready for a bad thing?
so there's different types and different formats and different modes and different goals. Give us the high level of what are the types of tabletops? What are the
Sure.
categories? What are the different models? High level.
Sure. So I would say it comes down to three, and this is where I'm going to borrow a little bit of my homeland security background because this is how I define tabletops, and this is how it's served me well in the past. So there's like sort of three ways to think about this. There's your drills, there's your tabletops, and there's your full simulations. Your drills are very much okay. Let's just sit around a room. Let's talk through. We got a ransomware mail. Who's doing what? Right. It's very simple. There's no real injects. It's more of just like, okay, this is something that's happening. How do we want to? How are users react to it? How do you react to it? How you're cool? Does everybody know what it is? I often compare it to like the fire team getting all their gear out, running a drill every day. Okay, can we load the truck in under 3 minutes? Cool, we know where our stuff is. We're ready to go. The truck can go out in 3 minutes or less. Awesome. That's a drill. A tabletop, well, let's go to the full scale. A full scale is where you have everybody in the room. That's key leadership. You've got all sorts of people together, and now you're simulating attack digitally and in person. Right? Usually, you'll have somebody running an attack simulation through systems and networks. You'll have evidence being created on the fly through a pen testing team. These are often very expensive, very large tabletops that really involve a lot of people in preparation.
So wait, you just to clarify that there's a situation room basically, but then there's also a red team someplace else, and it might be on the other side of the hallway, but it could also be the other side of the planet.
100%. And they're hitting it, and your situation room is trying to respond. I've participated in that full scale level exercises when I was in MSISAC. We were part of that for the country. They're no joke. Kroll used to roll those out too. Like they're full on. And these are often 6-figure tabletops, right? These are things that major corporations do. Well, what's in between, right? What's in between that drill and the okay, you've got NORAD level situation room. That's where the tabletops are, and they can vary in size and scope depending on people which kind of is. But the big thing, the difference between a drill and a tabletop is in a tabletop there are scenes and injects, right? So scene one, it's a calm day. You get a ticket created for you saying someone's locked out. Okay, IT help desk. What are you doing here? Oh, we're going to go investigate. Okay, inject. That person doesn't actually work here. Okay, now that's weird. Now you start building a scenario where oh, well, we're dealing with a compromised account that was created overnight, and now we have someone with admin rights who created a ticket somehow. Blah, blah, blah. Now what do we do? We've got an attacker inside the room, inside the systems. How do we respond? And so it's about walking through what you would do, but walking through what you would do with injects provided by an outside facilitator usually, or an inside facilitator, but someone who's not participating, saying, cool, you did that. Just so you know, that doesn't work. Or, hey, just so you know, this person has. If you've ever been doing a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, that's always a good analogy I put for this. It's very similar to Dungeons and Dragons.
So there's a game master.
Exactly. Who's facilitating.
Yeah. So just to back up, because you went really fast there, the drills, that's really just a read through of a procedure of the parties involved. Hey, does everyone think that this very specific activity sounds right? Do we find any gotchas? I guess after that's like the last step before you take that draft and say, okay, here's the playbook. But then
pretty much
the reality is that whatever you're drilling on is part of a much larger world, right? So you can't test every scenario in a tabletop, right? So what's the let me zoom out even more. I've been a part of many tabletops, facilitated some, participated in others. Some of them are really great, and it's clear they're really great. Maybe you don't know until you've done a few of them. Some of them are really bad. Like I'm just saying, like it doesn't seem like the people here are really engaging or learning anything. How do you what makes for a good exercise?
Well, so there's a couple of things, and you bring up a really good point. There's bad tabletops and good tabletops, and a good tabletop is kind of hallmarked with someone who is prepared, right? They have done their homework. They've researched your organization. The worst thing you want to see is someone walking with the binders, never talk to anybody, says, okay, now you have ransomware. That's like, you want to talk to someone who understands, hey, you've got critical systems here, or you've got a team that does a lot of specialized work and they're over here, or you've got a couple individuals with some really intrinsic knowledge, but that knowledge isn't shared very well, right? Why do you want someone who's very prepared? Because they can help figure out that scenario that's actually going to push you. And that's what makes a good exercise. It's an exercise, right? In exercise, if you lift 1 pound weights, you feel good, but you're not doing anything. You need something that's gonna give you a heavy lift. So you need something that pushes beyond. So when you read through that on a drill, sometimes you're like, okay, and then we'll be at the office by 5 to resolve this on the weekend. And then we actually do the tabletop. You discover that no one can access the building on 5 because they don't have keys. And you don't discover that until someone asks the question of like, do you have access to the building on the weekend? And someone goes, no, our key cards don't work. That we don't have access to the building. We need keys. That's the injects that push you, that force you to think a little bit outside the box. And hopefully, if you've got a good prepared facilitator and you've got a scenario that's going to push you just a little bit harder. And the last piece that makes it a good tabletop is an engaged team. If people are on their phones, people aren't paying attention, people are checked out, you're going to get it. Even if you've got those 2 things in place, it's not going to be good. But if people are engaged and ready to participate and you've got the right facilitator and the right scenario, it will feel real. It'll feel challenging, and people will learn from it. That's what you want to see in a good tabletop. If you don't have those 3 things, it's likely to be a bad tabletop.
Yeah, and I've seen tabletops that are focused on skill or protocol, and then I've seen some that are focused on a specific organization. I've actually seen people get really engaged when they're role playing,
Yeah.
and I'm curious to what extent, like, how realistic is it useful to make things? Like, do you want to cross the line where all of a sudden people get defensive? Is that like, how do you fight that kind of thing?
So there's different styles in the space. So I've known some people who will really push players, right, to really try to get that feeling to raise the temperature. I've known people who do things like the phone will ring and someone will pick it up and they're like, it's CNN calling, and they have one of their staff members calling and pretend to be the news, asking questions, right, just a time, which is wild and cool. You got to have the right process and audience for it, but it feels cool when you can pull it off. So you can get really involved. Um, our My philosophy is I like to read the room, and we tend not to go super involved. There's usually enough to discuss in terms of like not having proper backups, having key knowledge. Like oftentimes we'll say, okay, Bob, who runs that one ancient server, he's on a cruise and he didn't pay for the internet, so you can't reach him, right? He's unreachable. And so now what do you do, right? Like between those kind of key factors, you don't need to add more temperature to the room. You don't need to add more pomp and circumstance usually. Now that being said, if it's an audience that has done tabletops and you want to kick it up a stage, or if you want to push some dynamics, you definitely can go that way if you feel like it's necessary. But it's a real read the room situation, and I found oftentimes there's plenty to discuss without having to ump the ante a little more.
So, we're in the MSP space, the channel space here. So, the implementation team is often, like, sometimes it's fully outsourced, fully managed MSP. Sometimes it's a shared role, right? Where
Yep.
you've got some amount of internal IT and then one or more outside contractors that are fulfilling business needs for the org. Um, how do you see the outside service providers participating in these? Like, how does that work? I mean, some service providers are really, really excellent at this stuff.
Mhm.
Some of them are a little bit weaker. I think at the end of the day, one of the reasons you perform a tabletop is to understand what is the organization not good at or not doing right now that it needs to get good at or needs to do, which usually creates scope for contractors. But what's the how do you see that work? I mean,
Yeah.
do you treat them as one big org, like the service provider and the enterprise, or do you take the MSP or MSSP aside and say, hey, okay, this is the role you're going to play? You give them like a little bit of like inside knowledge
It's
into the.
it's a good question. Like, so sometimes I show up and the MSP is like looking at me like, "Oh, you're gonna make me look bad," and I'm like, "No, that's not." We tend to look at this situation holistically, unless it's clear from the client. Unless the client's telling us, "No, we really want you to test the MSSP," right? This is a test of them, which rarely happens. Um, it's the enterprise, right? It's a whole, and the MSP or MSP is the part of the enterprise effectively, right? They're defending it, they're part of it, they're helping service it. So they are part, in most cases, either serving a key role or at the very least, being involved in certain functions. And so where those functions align with our desire to test, right, we will meet with them. We want to understand them. We want to understand their challenges. And we want them to talk to us about what they do. and also what they think that they could do better, right? We want them to be transparent because it what gives us a chance to showcase that in the tabletop, gives us a chance to let them showcase what they're capable of, and open the door to potential other ideas. Like, hey, just so you know, if they had this, they could do more with these kind of tools that they already have, right, Mr. Customer. I'll share kind of two stories though about how it works for us, right? So, the good and the bad. The bad. I've shown up and the MSP does the bare minimum. They're only answering when spoken to. They're not engaged. Whoever they sent is just sitting at the table going, "Yep, we found a ticket. We send it." What are you doing at that point? Nothing. We're waiting to recall the upon. Like they're almost instructed not to be involved. And I'm like, it's such a missed opportunity, and it doesn't look good anyway. And on the other side, I had this one MSSP. We were talking about paying the ransom, right? So the client, what happened was there was data that had been exfiltrated, and the attacker was threatening to dump that data in the dark web. And one of the senior leaders of the organization was pushing back on paying because they're like, listen, it's just personal data, but it's not sensitive data. It's not required. We're not required to protect this data per se. Who cares if it's out there? What's the value of this data anyway, right? Why are we going to pay this ransom or take these actions? And the MSSP at that who had been involved, very involved in the conversation, and interviewed with my team and had talked to us about their challenges and what they're like. I said, okay, let me just show you what we have. They pulled up their dark web monitoring tools, went to a dark web page, right, an actual page where you go and buy and trade this information, and they showed the audience, which including the senior leaders, what the value is of the kind of data that they were talking about, and how easy it was to buy, and how well attributed it was to the places it had been stolen from. They showed that. Silence for 4 seconds, complete turnaround of conversation. Okay, I guess we got to figure out if we have to pay the ransom now, right? And that made that MSSP look so much more capable and so much more aware of the threats than they were before. Like I remember one of the other senior leaders pulling me aside, like, I'm really glad they're on our team because that's really cool. They can do that. I didn't even know they had access to that information. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty crazy what people have if you just ask them about the tools that they use to defend you. And so that's an example of the good of the situation as opposed to the bad.
Yeah, so if it's not clear to all of the listeners, MSPs can't run, or MSSPs can't run the incident without the client, right? You're not going to successfully protect the end client from risk if the incident's only handled by the MSP or MSSP. But on the other side, if an organization has an MSP or MSSP, that means they need help, and they don't just need a little help. Right? They need real expertise in real time, on call when they need it. Right?
Yep.
So it's really a marriage there, and it should be at the center of the value exchange. There's a lot of things that providers can offer, and they don't because the clients don't understand the value. And this is like one of those great, you were just highlighting like one of those shining light moments of like, oh, you mean those XYZ, in this case, maybe dark web monitoring tools. Oh, there is an actual concrete like use or value there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me about that. Like, how many people are, because all these companies that, the enterprise is paying for the license, right? They're just not using it. And to your point, like, they don't know how it's being used until they see it in action, right? And I will push back a little bit. Many MSSPs handle minor incidents, little phishing attacks, business email compromises. They honestly can probably handle most of it without anything being escalated to most enterprises. Especially think about like a medical practice, right? The doctors aren't going to care. Like, did you pay any money? No. Does anything been compromised? No. Great. Thanks for solving it. Appreciate the heads up. They're not going to care. But that's your garden variety attack. And that's where tabletops really push. Again, we're trying to, we could do tabletops and garden variety attacks. For some organizations, they ask us to, if it's like their first one, like we just kind of want to see how it goes. But for most organizations, it's about testing a little bit, not the garden variety. And that's your point. Like, that's when the enterprise is called in because something went bad and went bad really bad. And it's now all hands on deck have to solve this problem collectively because it's real impact, right? Could be data being stolen, so you have to, notify, or there's regulatory requirements. It could be money being lost. It could be operational downtime. Whatever it is, it's calling, to your point, all hands on deck. And having people be familiar with the capabilities and tools before they go all hands on deck, kind of nice.
So you just brought up sort of a totally unengaged MSP, and
Yeah.
then you brought up like the hero MSP. I think on average, if you've got a competitive offering in the MSP or MSSP space, you're gonna look like the hero. Like you're doing a lot of stuff your customer doesn't really understand and doesn't
Hmm.
see, right? And that's sort of your moment to prove value. Um, what are the typical outcomes here? And I know that there's some actual outputs from a process like this, right? That goes back to the org. We should go through those, but then there's also like and after those outputs, what's the typical like domino effect?
So when we do, so it's good question. So when we engage, so this again, this is how we do, which is generally the industry standard. Um, we're going to give a report, and the report goes back to the client. So we're going to create the scenario. Scenarios usually handled in slide decks. Some clients we request them afterwards. Some people don't care. We'll give them this so they can see it afterwards. And then what really matters is a summary report. We identify, what did we, what was the scenario about? What went well? What did not go well? And that is where there's an opportunity to highlight, in the meeting, in the tabletop, MSSP brought up this tool. You don't have this tool. We highly recommend you get this tool, right? Because it in the similar situation in the future, this is something that's important. So our deliverable is about, hey, this is what happened to that 3 to 4 hour block or 2 hours, whatever. And this is what we saw. Now, what we do, which sometimes is something a little beyond, is we're also going to go back and say, okay, these are your policies and procedures. These are the things that weren't followed. These are things that were followed. And that's an important deep thing because as an old professor of mine once said, what's a plan? A plan is something you're deviating from, right? It's okay if you're not following the plan, but you have to have a plan to follow. And so we kind of identify, how far away from the plan did you go? And there may be reasons for it. Maybe, people didn't know to call or people didn't know who the right people to talk to were. But that's always a great opportunity to sit down and say, okay, we did the scenario. We followed the plan pretty good to about the middle point. And we started kind of making a new plan. Why? What was different? Why do we need to do that? Is it a resource we were missing? Is it people that weren't involved? Is it people that maybe made a different decision than we thought they would make? That's another part of the process. That's a part of the deliverables that we give our clients. The last thing is also too is a sense of like, hey, how often this can happen, right? And why does this need to be something that's thought of? But sometimes we'll provide some guidance, like this happened here and this happened there. Here's some real world scenarios. But I can tell you right now, most MSPs, if they got a copy of this report, where I would say, yeah, I've seen 6 other clients that had the exact same thing happen, right? These are, common things they can point to. But that's usually the deliverables we give our clients, and that's where they see the real value, right? What happened? What went well, what didn't go well, and more importantly, what was not followed as part of the plan, because that helps you figure out a better plan for the future or separate plans, right? If the plan was written for ransomware and we give them an insider threat scenario, well, your plan isn't good for that. So you need to make a separate one for insider threat, which is unfortunately something you have to think about as well too.
So I wanna put a pause on the tabletop thread for a moment and just put this in perspective. It depends on which security standard you're looking at, but sometimes tabletops get lumped in alongside penetration testing,
Hmm.
risk assessments, even vulnerability management. You're going in, you're discovering problems, right?
Hmm.
And then you're using that like shining light moment to, you know, make change the organizational trajectory, right?
Hmm.
Um, I um, I see a lot of people spending a lot of money on penetration tests that sometimes are really great exercises, right? And are really finding things that couldn't be uncovered any other way.
Hmm.
I also see a bunch of security dollars get diverted towards penetration testing, and I'm talking about whether it's a fully automated scan or you've got a small team, and I'm not talking about red teaming exercises. I'm talking about
Yeah.
like the typical pen test. 1 to 3 people working through a specific playbook, producing that report of they captured the flag or whatever. Um, sometimes it could be expensive. Sometimes it takes up a lot of effort. I sometimes worry that it's a distraction from, really glaring gaps that you could find in easier ways. On the other hand, tabletops, I think that they expose things that you really can't find any other ways in some cases, pretty predictably. The process failures, what knowledge do people actually have in their head? How are they going to react in an emotional scenario? Hopefully that's what you elicit. Like, what's the emotional
Yeah.
reaction going to be? That's important to understand. Um, the I'm curious how you see these relating to those other areas. Do you lump in your mind, is this a type of penetration test to you, or do you think it's a separate category?
So that's a fascinating question. You make up a lot of really good points. Let me share how I've approached this in the past because I've done pen testing. Sold pen testing with partners. We sell pen testing at K Logix. I always compare a pen test as a test of the systems, tabletop as a test to the organization. And that's to your point, right? You won't a pen test won't tell you how fast people can communicate internally or how well they make a decision on whether or not they alert regulators. The pen test will tell you how quickly an adversary can get access to the data or gain ownership of AD or whatever, right? Like, that's there. There is no shortage of things that pen testers will tell you that are related to technical systems, but there is a shortage of things they'll tell you from how the organization will process and respond. Now, to your point, like red team, separate, right? Because a red team hopefully is, the blue team is responding in line with the red team, and there's some communications you can kind of figure out from there. But that's where a tabletop steps in and says, okay, does my comms team actually know what they're doing? Right? Is legal prepared to make decisions on very important regulatory requirements? Is HR ready to communicate through out of band channels when there's a malicious insider? These are all things that don't get tested in pen test. And even from an IT perspective, right? How well can you identify certain systems and rebuild aspects of it? That's not necessarily going to come up with a pen test. That's going to come up in discussion with the tabletop. Now, I often see them as sort of wonderful things to pair together. So, and I say this because if I could, I would always love to do a pen test first and a tabletop second. And here's why. Sometimes at the tabletop, you need a storyline. And if the pen tester successfully got in and seized control or you instantly have a storyline that you can point to with the tabletop. And it adds a lot more resonance when you say to the senior leadership, yes, this is a scenario playing. We've made some changes, names have changed to protect the innocent. But just so you know, you paid a group of people and they got in and did this exact same thing. So this isn't just like, oh, well, this couldn't happen, really. No, it actually happened 3 weeks ago because a bunch of pen testers that you paid did it. And now we've changed a few factors, but it's effectively the same story. That sends such a huge message back to people. So it's a wonderful thing to put together. I often think too as well that like it's something that you want to do after you've done like a risk assessment for a completely different reason. After you do a risk assessment, you've identified a lot of challenges and hopefully you fix all those challenges. And then you bring a tabletop to say, okay, did we fix all the right challenges? Did the things that actually make a difference get fixed? So tabletop fits in with all those things you mentioned. It's synergistic with them and it's something that goes alongside them and hopefully feeds into the ultimate way of trying to figure out, can your organization respond to the bad guys?
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that a typical tabletop is not exhaustive, because no one wants to sit there for a week.
Yeah.
So you you're going to be testing some of the ways the organization is going to respond in some scenarios, and ideally this would be a process that you'd be repeating in a cycle, right? And
Mhm.
running different scenarios over time. I like recommending tabletop type uh, investigations over a pen test. Sometimes if someone has limited, they can only get one thing, because
Mhm.
I typically see more weakness on the people side when I go in and do my assessments. And
Common, yeah.
and so and the typical pen test does not really get into the people side of the equation. So um, the I really buy into that narrative though of validating the scenario because I think that that's really powerful. I'm curious though, what do you do with your reporting timeline? Do you wait to report on the pen test until after you've run the tabletop and then deliver both reports?
It's a great question. It's funny. Oftentimes, the audience for the pen test report isn't the same for the tabletop report. The pen test report goes to head of IT or the CISO who just wants to see how bad things are, and it usually stops at their desk for a lot of reasons. It can go larger, and it oftentimes nowadays does go to the board or leadership, especially because of regulatory or framework requirements. But I don't see any problem with them being separate. I think the key thing is that the tabletop, to your point, is testing different aspects. The people are the problem, and oftentimes it's the organizational response that causes the bigger issue. Like bad guys get in, that happens. But when organizations decide not to notify, or organizations are unable to communicate the impact of this properly to regulators or others, that's when the real issues come in, right? Like that's where you start reading in the write up of the court cases, why are they being fined? Well, they're being fined because someone got in. They're getting fined because someone got in and they made bad decisions about what to do with that information or that process. And so um, I would imagine the reports should probably come around the same time. This way you can see, okay, how you handled and what, this was how they got in technically, and this other region handled it the other way, but it could go either way.
I want to go. So I know we're talking about tabletops today, but I want to go back to something that I want to underscore something you just said. People get fined. I want you to expand on this. People get fined not because of what happened, but because of, I guess, why it happened, right? Why were they? If you make an error, right, that's a human thing to do. That's categorically different than I made a poor decision because I was ignoring something. I was uninformed. I wasn't following best practice, even if the outcome was the same, right? One's worse than the other because it was preventable.
You're absolutely right. Like I always tell clients, like there's two press releases being written here, or two news articles, excuse me, your local paper. One is company willfully ignored control signals, made decisions based on budget to not enforce proper security protocols, and when incident happened, failed to respond in an appropriate manner. The other one is company has invested in security protocols. When incident happened, quickly notified customers and others. This could have happened to anybody. Those are two different stories. And to exactly to your point, it's about the intent. Like if you've taken the time to truly protect your organization, to be a steward of the data that you've been entrusted with, and a bad thing happens, the response from regulators and others, you still might get a fine. You still might face a lawsuit. But the scale and scope of the impact is going to be very different than, to your point, you willfully ignored alerts, you willfully made bad decisions, you tried to hide things, right? The cover up is always worse than the crime. Like the minute you start making decisions that are going to be running afoul of the law or not in the best interest of your those you've entrusted your data to, right? You have effectively a fiduciary duty to the data that you've been given. Is the minute you start figuring how much money more you're going to pay when this is all found out. Now, some companies still roll the dice because they go, well, who's going to know about it, right? It's just, we already paid off that attacker. We solved this problem. Who's going to find out about it? But in this day and age, that's a big risk. And unfortunately, people find out. It's going to happen. It's going to get out there. And then you're going to have the lawsuits. You're going to have the regulators. You're going to have the problems. So taking the time to do the right thing is not just in your ethical best interest, but it's in your financial best interest too.
Yeah, and when you mentioned the press, and I know you were talking about like there's a difference between a press release, which is something you're intentionally, you could try to spin things however you want, right? But the reality is people are going to report what they want to report. It doesn't even matter if it's based on fact. If they can even hang like a small shingle on there's a potential perspective that could be validated that this person might be seen as trying to avoid something, that the press loves scandal. They don't love the human interest stories of like people trying to do things and sometimes failing. Like what they really want to report on is this is a horrible person. And those are the stories that are going to dominate in cyber, just like everything else.
Well, and that's where I often, so we have a team that does tabletops. I tend to, I don't facilitate them as much myself anymore, but I tend to participate them. And I tend to do that so I could be a voice of like external, like I'm like Jiminy Cricket on the shoulder of the executives, right? Like, should you really be doing that? I'm just saying, like, let me just walk you through a potential scenario here. And that kind of influences their thought process a little bit. Like, all right, maybe I shouldn't be taking these actions. Maybe I shouldn't be, trying to cover this up. I mean, it's funny, like we've had a lot of tabletops and I get so upset when the company decides to pay the ransom in the tabletop. Now we always give it as an option because sometimes it is the option. I mean, it's the world we live in. I mean,
also sometimes it's out of your control. If the insurer decides they want to pay the ransom, that could be what happens.
That's true too. That is 100%. There's a lot of factors, right? And hospitals got to keep operating, right? There's tons of, but I always get
It feels
sad.
icky though, right?
It does.
feels.
It's so wrong, and it's like you gave in. You in this, and because I know if you're going to do that in a tabletop when the stakes are this low, right? What's the worst that happens? You say, okay, we'll take a hit. We'll take a hit. There's no real hit happening here, but you're willing to pay the ransom in a tabletop. That tells me that you're willing to pay the tabletop. You're willing to pay the ransom in the real scenario, and then it kind of feeds into the structure. Like, why do we keep having bad attacks? Because people keep paying ransoms. That's part of the problem. And again, I'm not saying don't pay ransoms. I'm not making a statement politically. I'm just saying, like, I always don't enjoy when people can't figure out a way out without paying the ransom. And that's to your point. That's one of those like, ugh, yeah, I know you got to do these type of things, but sometimes you got to think through, like, is this really the right thing to do?
I I think even people not in cyber can that resonates, that it feels icky to pay the criminals, right? Like
It does. It does. And it's just,
yeah.
No. Always keep that score.
I just want to bring this back because it's the MSP show, right? So the value that MSPs get out of this, right? I presume it's well, first they get to look great, right? And we talked about that a little bit, but there's actually some actionable things that come out after the report, which I mean, ultimately this should turn into engagements. If you're an MSP and you don't walk away with some kind of project out of this, you did something wrong in the tabletop.
Totally. So I would say there's three big, like if you're the MSSP and you're sitting there, you're going to try to do three things. One, look, this is a dry run, right? Like, hey, would we actually, hey guys, after the fact, would we actually have caught that alert? Like, would that actually have reached our level of truth? Yes, we, in the scenario the facilitator said it did, but would we really, right? There's a great chance to have that conversation after the fact of like, would we actually perform the way we thought we would perform the tabletop? The other thing is that for many MSPs, they deal with like a handful of people in the company, the head of IT, maybe some service people, some other business leaders. You don't get to meet the CEO. You don't meet the COO. You don't meet the press office. You don't meet the general counsel. Now you do. And now you get to look at the room and go, okay, everybody is listening to this general counsel. Like their word is gospel, which not a bad decision in general to listen to general counsel like that. So but the conversations that they're having, you can listen and go, okay, when a crisis is happening, I know I need to make sure that the general counsel is in the call so they can weigh in and people can feel either more confident with their decision or we can make sure we make the right decisions. You get to learn the personalities. And the last thing is, a lot of MSPs have run books, again, not casting aspersions, but those run books are sometimes copy and paste from different organizations, right? Because it's just easier. Like, okay, we know how to handle this, we know how to handle that, we're managing what's the systems. What if it's a little different? Now they have a chance to go back to the run books and say, okay, we just did a tabletop where it was a little different. How does a run book actually handle this? Not just for this client, but for really all our clients, right? It gives you some food for thought. And when we're the facilitator, we're providing that to everybody. You guys use as you please, right? And that's a wonderful thing that you get to test, to your point earlier, in a very low stakes, low cost situation, right? Like you don't have to see if this would work in the future. You just saw how your run book performed in this tabletop. So now take some changes and make some changes.
Yeah, so one of the things I heard there was, and I'm talking to you, MSP, don't send like your brightest engineer to the tabletop to fill a seat. Like really, like the account manager should be there. Like there should be owner, yeah. You should be bringing extra heads because like that's your chance to shine.
100%. And we always tell people too, like if we have a tabletop, most formats have participants and observers, right? And the observers are in the back kind of saying, they're there to pay attention and maybe they can be talked to, but it's the participants. You can put the brightest engineer there so that you shine on that stuff. But like you said, make sure the account manager is behind them and then, whatever, so they can take notes and be part of the conversation after the fact.
All right. I threw the splash page up there. We didn't talk about K Logix at all so far. So great job. I think the only thing I heard was, and we also do pen tests. But who's K Logix? Why do they exist? Who are they supporting?
Yeah, so we are a people-first cybersecurity firm specializing in risk consulting, testing, research, and resale. Right? We are white glove. We show up and we want to onboard into our clients, not the other way around. We want to help take care of them. I run the consulting aspect of it. We have a phenomenal pen testing team that my colleague George runs. We have a great research team, which is almost like private Gartner for our clients. And then we do tech resale. So we sell all the different tech vendors and products. You name it, we sell it. It's a big chunk of the work we do. My team in particular, obviously we do tabletops, but we also do risk assessments. We do gap assessments for ISO, SOC 2. You name the framework, we come in and we assess against it. We also do programmatic reviews, right? So if you're kind of concerned about your data governance, how well you prepared you for AI, et cetera, we can bring people who are experts in it to review, take a look at it, give you some roadmaps on how to improve, and then potentially even help you with some aspects of improvement, like procedures, documentation, or performing a tabletop, right? That's part of what our stack is there. And we've been in business now for 24 years. The two guys who own it, Kevin and Kevin, great guys who run the company. They founded it 24 years ago. We're growing. We're in the Northeast, but we also have a team in Tennessee. We have a team in Southern California. I have staff people in Chicago, right? So we are all over the country effectively and growing. And we continue to find a lot of big clients and small clients. We've worked with, some of our clients are some of the biggest companies in the world. And some of our clients are nonprofits in the Northeast who are just doing God's work, and we're happy to support them, right? So we're all over the map in that regard. And like I said, our biggest thing is that we're people business, and we're about helping people. We are a team of helpers whose sole role is to help solve our clients' security problems and make them feel better about their future. That's what we're about, bar none, end of story.
Well, Ryan, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
I've been doing this show for a couple of years, so it's glad that I finally got you on here.
Yeah, it's been a while, especially.
Yeah, last time I met you in person, I'm actually not sure where it was, but I definitely in Albany at one point.
It was a coffee shop. We were just chatting. I think we connected on LinkedIn. You're like asking me questions about CIS and what we're doing and stuff. And I think I was almost on my way out of CIS. I probably was like, oh, it's a good place. I'm can't really speak more after that because I might be gone. But it's a good place. Still is. Good mission. Love the folks over there.
Yeah, they had a tough year, I think.
They did.
Yeah.
But we'll come around. And you know what?
Yeah.
Most of the mission is still there. The CIS controls, which we're proud sponsors of, the best practices that we use in our assessments nowadays. And the MSISAC mission is still continuing on, right? If there's anything we've learned over the years is that we need to work collaboratively to help solve cyber challenges. MSISAC represents one of that. We, even as vendors at K Logix, right? We have 300 clients. We are constantly trying to share information amongst our client base on threats, on what we're seeing, on trends. We're a trends-based business, and we're trying to say, hey, we're seeing this. We want to share this with you because the only adversary in cybersecurity is across the board. It's not, we're all, we all must say different product, we all do different things, but the true adversary is the attacker. It's the only part of IT that has this, and we need to share information so that the adversary is on the back foot instead of us, and that's the best way to do it. And that's my soapbox. I'm gonna get off of it. Sorry.
All right. So quick takeaways before the weekend. We get to enjoy whatever our weekend plans are. For me, I'm gonna be rest because I'm no longer fighting snow. And I've been fighting snow for the last week. So the tabletops live alongside other exercises like risk assessments that are usually first. Pair really well with penetration tests, but the goal is on the people. And really shining a light on those things that MSPs do great, but also those areas that the organization probably needs to invest in a little bit more engagement with their provider.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, it's the only thing I'd add to that is if you're an MSP and you see someone from the outside coming in to do a tabletop, embrace that opportunity. Jump in with both feet, share what you think the client should be doing, share your thoughts, be an active participant. And I think the best outcome I've seen for an MSSP is, like I said earlier, when I'm leaving the meeting and that MSP just did a great job, and people are like, "I'm sure glad they are on our side," right? Like that from someone who's never talked to those people to say, "Wow, I'm glad we're working with them." That's going to keep renewals. That's going to keep them trusting you. That's going to keep you engaged for many, many years. And that all happened because a tabletop happened, not an incident, not something more. A tabletop, and they were able to take advantage of it. So if you see someone from the outside, don't be scared, embrace it, use it, and you will benefit from that.
Yeah, and after you've been through a few of these are things you can introduce into your practice. It's an excellent thing to add to your menu.
100%. Wish more people did.
All right,
I really do.
Well, thanks, Ryan, and welcome you back sometime in the future.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.